First of all, could I say that I am welcoming you on behalf of the European Ambassador, Ambassador Chantal Hebrecht. What you'll hear this afternoon is the first lecture under the auspices of the European Union Information Centre in Addis Ababa University. But now we're talking about climate change. The lectures are on climate change and its impacts. And we think this is important for Europe. The Europeans are making a big fuss about climate change at the moment. But we think it's even more important for Ethiopia. So to celebrate World Environment Day, which was last Sunday on the 5th of June, I'd like to introduce our three speakers. Dr. Belay Samane, who will talk about climate change in Ethiopia. Mr. Daniele Morbin, who works in the European Union delegation and will talk about the causes of climate change and EU efforts to counter climate change. And then Professor Marco Vigiano, who will talk about environmental activism. So, if I could ask the first speaker, Professor Belay, please to come up.
So, thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. It's really a privilege for me from the academia to share my experience and also to look for further collaboration in the EU and others. So, the topic I'm given to talk today is about the impacts of climate change and the responses in the Ethiopian context. First, warming or climate change is unequivocal. I think at least for Africa, we've accepted it with 110% that climate is changing. Now, further climate change is inevitable. Let me walk you to the Ethiopian climate change scenarios. So it's not really a simulation, but historically it has already increased by almost 1.3 degrees Celsius over the last 30 years. This is a very good indication that climate change is not really a rhetoric. So you can imagine what will happen to humanity, biodiversity, and natural resources if this is going to happen in the coming 30, 40 years. It's so important for us because our GDP, our economy, our livelihood is inherently linked with the climate change scenarios. So the population pressure, the fragile environment we have, the dominance of climate-sensitive environment, and more importantly, the low adaptive capacity of the population, which is the poverty level, it makes Ethiopia highly vulnerable. The impacts are felt through food security, through water availability, access to water, the air, the quality of air, and the weather we experience are the impacts that we're expecting. If we accept it is anthropogenic and taking the human rights, the global human rights issues, who should take really the responsibility? And who will be most affected by climate change? And which countries should do more to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions? Now, the historical responsibility, the debate between China and the developed country parties also. And do such countries have an obligation to help us, really, as EU is doing, by the way. EU is our partner in the negotiation also, so I'd like to thank the EU negotiators in the amount of emission we are contributing to the global warming is eminently insignificant. It's not even visible. So, looking into the science of climate change, the mitigation and adaptation, this will clearly show which is the priority for Ethiopia. However, even though here you can see China, USA, which is on the economy-wide global emission, nationwide emissions, but on per capita basis, it's the reverse. I think this is also one gray issue in the debate, who should take the responsibility. Considering all these issues, Ethiopia really has made a very tremendous and significant move by launching its climate-resilient green economy strategy, which all of you are aware. So here is the issue. This strategy, this vision, focuses on two issues: the the mitigation component and the resilient component while developing or achieving a middle-income country by 2025. So you can imagine how difficult it is. Really, it's really very difficult. It is knowledge-intensive, it's capital-intensive, and particularly the knowledge that should be shared up to the grassroots level is really a serious task and barrier for us. 75% of the emissions, even though it is insignificant, comes from the agriculture sector, both the agriculture and the forestry. So if you want to help Ethiopia's transformation into a green growth, then the agriculture sector is a priority. The difficult part is the adaptation component, the resilience component, even though different institutions, including EU, has got also its own definition. But let me tell you, for us, for Ethiopia, adaptation for Ethiopia means sustainable development or growing green, in short. Mitigation is essentially a global effort, whereas adaptation is a very local one. This makes, the LDC countries in a very difficult situation in terms of capacities and in terms of adaptation. Now, so in terms of household level responses, we have so many, initiatives. We've got on the biodiversity responses, and also in the water and energy, about the power generation, energy access, the irrigation, the wash, the cross-cutting issues are also set as part of the adaptation processes in the water and energy strategies. The achieving, the ambition, the plan is really very encouraging, and it has been held also by the international community. But implementing requires quite a lot of effort, coordination of different institutions, different actors, stakeholders, donors, and NGOs and GOs. Thank you.
I will tackle the climate change from a different point of view. I will not go to the context of Ethiopia, but more general, and specifically then to the Ethiopian context. I mean, the effort that the European community is doing. And then we can see some interesting picture on renewable energy. We are around 400 ppm, and 450 ppm is considered the limit where, if we pass it, the damage of climate change will be very, very significant. The side effect of the increase of carbon dioxide is the increase of temperature. So basically, all the effects of climate change are related to the increase of temperature. The agreement in Paris was to keep temperature below 2 degrees centigrade, but focusing on 1.5. What is the status? We base the estimation on INDC. Most of the country, almost all the countries presented their intended nationally determined contribution, which is not enough. We see that with this actual contribution, we will end up by the end of this century to 2.4, 2.7 degrees. It is something, but it is not enough. The sooner we start, the easier is to reach the target. In the next 5 years, we will reach this limit. And we have more or less 20 years to reach the 2 degrees centigrade. So we don't have much time to act. Reason why big countries like US, China, India raise always against the reduction of greenhouse gas is because of the economy, because to reduce the emission, it will cost. But we can see that for Europe, we can still grow, and this was the index in 1990. So this is the GDP growth, and this is the emission. So we were able to shift, still keeping the economy growing. Per capita emission, we have seen before, Ethiopia is 1.8 ton. Europe starts at 12. We reach 9. and the objective is to reach 6 by 2030. Now let me see what, what is available already in our world. So the trend is quite impressive on the increase of the use of renewable energy. Every time we double the production, we decrease the price by 20%. And with this trend, we reach levels that are very impressive. So the mass production really decreased the cost of the technology. Thank you.
Where is the twilight of environmental activism in a country that doesn't produce a lot of carbon dioxide, is based on rural development, has a fantastic policy for green growth, which works? You will see where Ethiopia will be in 15 years. I think huge things will happen because nothing has happened yet. So something big has got to happen, and I believe this government is getting things moving. Because I mentioned the pesticides are exactly the same as in Europe. Please read the last line. Peter, the glass houses are automated and ventilated in Europe. No one is subject to their effects. So we have to see the whole picture. We have to be smart enough. Europe has decreased greenhouse emissions. Do you know that parts of them were from the greenhouses? Do you know that Holland was keeping their glass houses well above 30 degrees? It's almost automatic here. Consuming a lot of fossil fuels. They're not doing it anymore. They transfer the problem here. They transfer the whole damn business here. It's not dumped because Ethiopia is exporting a lot and getting a lot of dollars. Every little villager that doesn't want the neighbor to cut the tree down is an environmental activist and is not really looking for trouble. But the brighter you are, the more you use your intelligence, the more you fish around, and the more you get into trouble if you talk. I'm not for the minimum salary. I've got another simple idea to propose to the whole country. Insurances. You know which is the biggest cause of death in Ethiopia? Not old age or something, I mean, it's trauma. So, if minimum wage, I agree, can be a problem economically. I'm not an economist, but I understand Prime Minister Haile Mariam Desalegns' speech. What about insurances? Then the insurances will oblige something to do something. The environment is so related to how we behave to each other because we are the culprits. We're the one changing it. We really believe that time over and over again, if we want to win climate change and not consider it as the main cause of famine in Ethiopia, we should start seeing that what was okay for us in the past is no longer okay. Things are changing so fast. Should we change our consciousness? Otherwise we don't solve the problems? Probably yes, but this is global. This is global. Professor has mentioned this so well. It seems that we are thrown up upon us, climate change. How do we react? Well, the activists know how to react. First rule, something to do about fish. Don't panic, organize. Action, reflection, action. Start from an action, see if this works, and see if we can change something in our small environment. So, that's why the area should be a park. The area is extremely beautiful. So why don't we give the water to the people? If you make small irrigation projects, the people will know to do the water. And if we turn into a park that's wide shores, these people will be very well off. It's one of the best spots in Ethiopia we missed. Because I think that's the way forward. Something should be done about this, which to me is not exactly a minor problem. Out of 1,900 hectares under flowers, big producers, more than 1/3 is owned by this single person. So, thanks to you.
What I would like to my first comment, because I'm an historian, and we see the things that is happening, that are not happening now, that start happening a few decades ago, but I think it's also important to look into the past and to some trends that existed in the past. The important thing is, in fact, Daniel was pointing one solution. It's the green energy. Ethiopia is also going to the good path of we're learning, going green. But I think there's a lot to do to create it amongst the grassroots a strong consciousness. And I think it's a new trend in Ethiopia, for instance. What is possible to do, is my question, to create a real awareness amongst the grassroots that assets that create social prestige and symbolical prestige are also really potential damagers of the future and sustainability of the country.
My comment is, we are taking climate change as at a very huge level. Climate change is like something big. And I think we should just look at a micro level and try to implement just simple solutions like reforestation. It doesn't take a lot of energy. The WREDA can, for example, implement such small initiatives to alleviate the consequences of climate change. What is being put in place to ensure that the climate funding, which is going to be, I think, the result of COP21, being really beneficial to the people at the grassroots who are facing all the days the consequence of this climate change. Thank you very much.
As the problem needs, very concerted effort and also coordinated effort, do you think that the international effort and also the national effort, including in Ethiopia, is really coordinated to address the problem? In your pie chart, I have seen that, if any other countries would like to help us, they have to focus on agriculture and also the forestry areas and so on and so on. But nowadays, I personally see, and also many research shows that countries like African countries, they should focus on the energy aspect, because what happened in the forestry, what happened most highly is impacted by the need of the energy. So don't you think, the focus on energy assistance, energy development is vital for our country? And also, how can we benefit as African countries? It's good, it's become cheaper in Europe, but we would like to have the same kinds of resource and energy here in Africa. How can we benefit that one? The last one is to Mr. Marco. As an activist, it's not easy to live as an activist, especially, for example, in our country. You have mentioned a lot of things, what happened in a flower factory and so on and so on. There is a huge corruption and also did by some people and so on and so on. We have beautiful rules and regulations, but what happened, when it's wrongly implemented with people. So what can we do as an individual? As you said, we have to be an activist. So what can we do? And what is your advice, when to curb such kinds of problem? Thanks a lot.
Climate change is nowadays a human rights issue. Climate change nowadays is an economic issue. Climate change is also a political issue. And climate change is also a social issue. So if you want to understand and address the impacts of climate change, you need to understand the whole complex setup of the country's institutions. Taking only the ethical consideration of climate change, which I raised, who should take responsibility? And in terms of equity, in terms of capacity, in terms of resources availability, this world is totally biased. The resource is somewhere else, the polluters are somewhere else, the capacity also there. So now here in Africa, particularly the least developed country parties, we are really deprived from our human rights. They have already taken the whole space, the space to reach, to limit the climate change to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The space is already taken by these already developed country parties. Now, where is the scope for us to grow? Now, thanks to science, thanks to technology, there are so many options for green growth. Taking these green technologies requires human capital. It requires also financial capital and access to technology, particularly the patent issue. We deserve this human capacity, the capacity building, the financial support, and other resources that we were deprived. At the expense of our poverty, somebody has grown up somewhere. For climate change, peace and security is very vital. Stability, accountability, consistency of governments is very, very vital. Whenever there is, good governance, good administration, accountability, definitely local people will save and maintain the health of the ecosystem. We are even allowed under the UNFCCC to grow even using fossil fuel as an engine of growth. But our governments took initiatives to grow green, which you applaud really, the initiative of the government. We have started quite ambitious initiatives, but much of the resources comes from our internal revenue. To the government and to any donor, that's my plea. Please, there is knowledge here, right? Local knowledge, but we need also international knowledge, international exposure. Because of our geographic location, we have also a comparative advantage to develop more renewable energy. I have the ambition of even having more renewable energy and more support in that regard, and there is no doubt about it.
What is interesting, in my opinion, is that they call it disruptive technology. We have some technology that enter the market and really in very few years will substitute the old one. I don't think that the Paris Agreement will solve the problem. The history is quite long. In 1992, there was the Rio Conference, and by that time, they were supposed to solve the greenhouse gas emission by 2000. Nothing happened. And then they start to think a different system, and they set up the Kyoto Protocol in 1997. It entered into effect in 2008. Now the Paris Agreement is still important to have a forum where we discuss, where we make awareness. All the people can understand that the situation is very serious, and if we don't take a step together, we will fail.
I quite agree with him. Ethiopia should be set for solar panels. Great to have Igoda, great to have Nazar and Mojo, but now we should really look into solar panels and into one big thing, which is called gigawatts, not megawatts. Whenever you save energy, you have saved a tree, a forest, a lake. Of course, the towns consume the electricity and the industrial plants. But the household in towns, I tried to calculate it, 2/3 is in Gerametad. One of the most inefficient machines, and dangerous by the way, I've ever seen in my life. And look at it, it's absolutely indecently inefficient. You were asking us, where do we go, where do we solve the problem? The issue is very complicated, it takes generations, but education is the solution. Ethiopia should put environmental education in the curricula at least from Cementenia or something. Why don't we use the carbon offset to plant the trees? We're not doing it yet for some problems, little problems. Of course, the Minister of Environment, great man, Dr. Gebes Gavier, he wrote the Convention on Biodiversity. So Ethiopians are forward in this. We should just get together, not be afraid. We've got a lot of means to share it. Start looking for little parks near you where you can be active.
We're running out of time. We could, I'm sure, take more questions and get more fascinating answers. I've just copied down a few quotes of things that were said by people during the various questions and presentations. Mitigation is global, adaptation is local. Negawatts. Experimental pigs. Climate change is a hot issue. Well, that's certainly true. Climate change is a hot issue. Coordination between us and you, coordination between all of those who deal with these issues. These are really the important things. So thank you very much indeed for coming today. Please thank our speakers, and we look forward to seeing you again, and we look forward to a series of lectures from the European female ambassadors and deputy ambassadors on whatever subjects they choose. Thank you very much.